Hey, welcome everyone to episode 3 of the Fujitsu Impact series, Driving AI for Real Business Outcomes. If you've been with us since the start, you'll remember that in episode 1, we uncovered why AI pilots failed and how governance is the key to success. In episode 2, we explored precision and trust in critical decisions. Today, we move to the next frontier, AI orchestration, humans and digital coworkers in action. In this episode, we'll dive into how Agentic AI enables digital coworkers that collaborate with humans to coordinate workflows across the enterprise. But let's start with a thought to frame today's conversation. If AI has its own to do list, what does that mean for yours? And to help us unpack that, we're joined by two incredible experts: Nicholas Lee, Executive Director of Data and AI and CEO for Fujitsu Intelligence in Americas, and Linus Lay, Group Vice President of Services for IDC Worldwide. So thank you both for being here today. Now, before we dive into the myths and realities, let's set the stage. So everyone's talking about AI and automation, but the real conversation today is about orchestration. So Fujitsu recently earned global recognition from the World Economic Forum for its work around multi-agent orchestration. So that tells us that this isn't just theory anymore, it's happening now. Nicholas, you've been working with organizations across industries on this. Can you start by telling us a little bit about the recognition that Fujitsu received, and then help us understand what is agentic AI and orchestration really about, and how is it different from the automation that most companies know today?
Hey, Carlos. Yeah, thank you so much for the kickoff here. I'm excited to be able to share that Fujitsu was awarded, as Carlos mentioned, the World Economic for top 18 global AI solutions program. So that's meaningful, innovative, novel, and deployable solutions. So these are deployable solutions across the enterprise. These are agentic AI orchestration, multi-agent with things like explainable AI that are helping customers really bring AI capabilities to their enterprise. And so a lot of organizations, we thought of the tasks are very isolated, or they're stuck within various systems, so multiple systems, fragmented workflows, and really building out this semantic layer on the ontology type of layer, we're able to get robust agentic orchestration across multiple different platforms. And so the need for agility in this space when it comes to agentic flow is one of the key reasons that we'll talk about today, but that we're seeing significant impact in terms of actual customer adoption at enterprise scale.
Mhm. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Nicholas. So that really helps set the stage for my next question. Let's move into one of the biggest myths we hear out there today. So, automation equals orchestration. Linus, IDC predicts that by 2030, more than half of the organizations will centrally manage AI agent orchestration. Why is this shift so critical, and what misconceptions do you see in the market?
Well, I think we got to start with this whole idea of automation in the first place, right? And when we look at the history of automation, it just tended to be in very routine and isolated tasks, right? They were very definable, of course. But with AI today, guess what? Half of CIOs believe that this is the moment that organizations have the opportunity to even reinvent their business models in the next 3 to 5 years. And this is from our CEO survey that just passed. It also reflects that growing optimism, right? That AI brings something different to automation. So it's this belief, and you can see here in this perspective, in this chart, that it leverages AI. By leveraging AI, you can do more than just routine task automation. Now the focus is on end-to-end and more complex workflows, right, that deliver measurable business benefits. And this is not something to be taken lightly. If you take any complex workflow, say from source to pay, you find a dozen or so data sources, many enterprise applications, and many processes and line of business owners as well that own the data and the process. So it's not just about AI. We'll talk about that. But we think that 40% of Asian firms, particularly here, will miss their AI goals if they take a very fragmented tool approach, right? And that's just highlights the orchestration urgency.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Linus. So that gives us a really clear picture. Nicholas, what about from Fujitsu's perspective? What's the biggest misconceptions we see about orchestration?
I think orchestration. We think about things around the AI. Obviously, the one that most people talk about is about replacing humans. It's not about replacing humans, as we talked about many times. It's about coordinating, humans and digital coworkers. It's about extending the capabilities of your existing staff, taking care of some of the capabilities, but allowing to have these sort of superpowers or AI assistants that can make them 20, 30, 40 times effective. When we talk about orchestration, you go back into like automation. Automation to me is very like fragmented, like you build it if then do type of task. Whereas when you get into like agentic orchestration, think of these as living and breathing kind of digital agents that your business. And so, it's not necessarily something that's, you want to be able to have this orchestration layer that can evolve, have new suppliers, or you have new products. You want that orchestration framework to be able to adapt to that, especially in really like complex environments. So we see things around manufacturing, supply chain, even back office. There's very complicated systems that are there. And so orchestration gives us a way to really coordinate across different parts of the organization, coordinate the workers. They all have kind of similar business objectives, similar type of data objects that they can work across, similar type of terminology. So it simplifies a lot of business complexity that's been growing or brewing over time. So digital coworkers, in our view, really handle the monitoring, the data movement, and the cross-system coordination. And humans really focus on kind of responsible judgment, trade-offs, and like accountability. So it's really orchestration of the digital agents, humans, and allowing you to be that very flexible. And that's where ultimately like the most power comes when you start to bring that type of capability into your organization.
Okay. Thank you, Nicholas. So that really helps to clarify things. Now, let's move into why orchestration truly matters for organizations today, especially in complex environments like manufacturing or supply chain. Linus, IDC research shows that orchestration boosts both resilience and agility. Why has this become so important for these industries?
Well, supply chain complexity really demands adaptive workflows, right? We're moving from static siloed processes to adaptive orchestrated workflows, that span planning, procurement, and production. So really three domains essentially. And think about all of the underlying platforms needed, right? So these are all enabled by cloud native platforms today. They involve a fair amount of AI and ML, some IoT and operating technologies as well, and in many cases span across enterprises in an ecosystem as well. So that's a multi-enterprise supply chain commerce network. So end-to-end orchestration, it's not just about the processes, it's also about the data, the analytics, the decision automation across all of the supply chain nodes, right? Therefore reducing latency and enabling dynamic trade-offs between efficiency and resilience. So one of the key things that we look at, right, when improving orchestration is that the KPIs, right, like OTIF and OEE, really need to align. And the underlying technologies, obviously, must just come together from the cloud, the network, the orchestration technologies, automation technologies, and even the data sharing technologies. But think about it also from an analytical dimension, right? How this separate ERP, and WMS and, even time management systems and planning management systems across partners need to come together. The visibility of tracking inventory, orders, and shipments across the network, right? The resilience and, the rapid response needed, right? When something out of the ordinary happens as well. The ability to do a lot of scenario planning. And of course, the KPI alignment, because all of this, requires some synchronization right across organizations at times as well. and not to forget compliance and sustainability as well, right? Facilitating all of the good regulatory reporting and sustainability data sharing is very, very important in this orchestration domain.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I guess that really highlights why orchestration matters. How about Nicholas? How does orchestration change the day-to-day operations?
It's a good question. About large enterprise or organization where you have, orchestration and agentic AI, the components, key success areas is having this kind of human in the loop work. We call it human loop workbench. And what you're doing is really essentially refocusing your organization to manage kind of the exceptions with that process. So imagine a multi-iteration around like a supply chain based use case. You have inventory and production, procurement. These agents are working together under kind of an evaluator agent. That evaluator agent will help pick and select. And then you have kind of also an orchestrator agent that will help determine the order of agents can actually work. And then you have governing agents that manage the agents over time. So you have this full kind of framework in the system wrap. And then what you do is have certain guardrails in terms of like, I'm okay with an agent making a decision based on this type of confidence score. And if it's not okay, then you have what's called the human loop workbench. And that's where you have your humans focus on those exceptions. You wrap the explainability around it. So you have to what logic went into why it did or didn't make a decision. So that's where we're seeing like the biggest impact, because you're taking stations and you're refocusing them on kind of areas where only kind of a human can ultimately orchestrate or solve those types of problems. I would say that if you think about the practical role of digital coworkers, it's not really the decision-making process, it's the coordination. So working between the different agents, making recommendations, ensuring kind of the right agent reaches the right people at the right time. There are like the more advanced, capabilities that we've seen with more mature customers, where over time they start to move that confidence scoring, where if it's a high enough confidence score, then they are willing to take an agent kind of outcome with that. And so again, that's where you see more of the organizational kind of transformation. But at the end of the day, we recommend humans stay in control. That way there's no longer kind of this blind spot or this late spot in terms of the overall organization.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Nicholas. So that makes the operational impact very clear. I'd now like to shift the conversation a little bit, and let's have a look at what actually makes all of this possible from a technology perspective. Nicholas, what technologies make orchestration possible today?
I think one of the most important things, because you can look at, there's many different products and platforms, and every company out there is being some form of agentic AI to market. When you think about multi-agent frameworks, these are where you're bridging across multiple different technology layers. So you need to have kind of this investment in what we would call like a semantic layer or an ontology. This will integrate the platform, so you have a consistent set of data objects and log within that environment. And so integrating things like Microsoft, Palantir, like ServiceNow and Salesforce into one operational layer is super important. Multi-agent systems only work at scale if they share kind of the same understanding of the business. And so that's what the semantic or ontology layer provides. It creates kind of this common model for key. And so if you're looking at orders and assets, constraints and risks, the agents operating in different systems can coordinate those different platforms. Oftentimes we've seen, especially in the early days of agentic, you see like a platform that has some level of workflow, but it's not communicating with the rest of the. So that's where you run into those limitations. And without kind of that shared layer, you don't get orchestration chaos, because you have many different systems working independently and not really coordinated together. And so I would say trust in orchestration really depends on transparency and guidance. So as you bring these environments together, explainability, audit, being able to audit those, having kind of policy enforcement must be part of kind of the runtime and not added layers. Design a agentic AI framework. We have the full wrap of those guardrails that the agent can do, what data they can access, and how they can escalate those decisions to a human. And that's ultimately how you both scale and safety when it comes to like a true multi-agent orchestration environment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you, Nicholas. That gives us a great overview of what the tech looks like behind the scenes. Linus, building on that, IDC sees agentic AI as a game changer. From your perspective, what's the number one benefit it brings to enterprises?
Well, by definition, right, it's a system of action, right? It is able to take decision making and drive it to completion in a particular complex business workflow. So when you think about the future of business processes and workflows, like Nicholas said, it's not likely that one agent is able to perform all tasks. You'll have specialist agents that can select suppliers, you'll have specialist agents that can monitor environments, and you'll have specialist agents that can do all of the paperwork, right, like the invoicing and et cetera, et cetera. So in order, right, to drive, right, a business process or complex workflow, he's right. You do need an orchestration layer that spans multiple agents. And that's why we see vendors, whether some of those mentioned by Nicholas, having to make sure that increasingly their agents comply with open integration standards like MCP and A2A, and some of them are very on the front foot as well to make sure that they're published, right, so that they are definable, right, and there's a taxonomy around what those agents do as well. And from a governance perspective, we find that, of course, enterprises are at very different stages of maturity. Right now they're reaching a stage of maturity where it calls for a COE, some central area of expertise where they actually can monitor and manage all agents, understand who's using what. There is some amount of coordination, but we haven't even reached level 4, level 5 stages of maturity where it's governed a lot more tighter, right? And of course a lot more focus on what the agents actually do and outputs that they derive as well. Because what you want to do is you want to govern agent behavior as well, because it can deviate from the norm.
Right.
But all in all, I must end with this positive note for sure, right? We predict that by 2029, firms that measure human and AI collaboration, quite effectively, right, through this governance layer, will actually have 15% higher margins, and that's just a byproduct, right, of all of this automation.
Well, that's a very interesting and positive perspective for the future. That's fantastic. So let's see now how this applies to the real world. Nicholas, can you share an example of where orchestration has delivered meaningful and measurable impacts?
Absolutely. I mean, got many use cases and case studies from a production-based deployment. The first one I'll highlight is one of the largest Japanese electronic manufacturers, and this was around like their broader supply chain. This is super complex environment, a million SKUs. We were able to build visibility across those SKUs through building out kind of the semantic or ontology layer, like within 2 weeks. You think about organization, think about human in the workbench. We were able to take an organization where they had around 1,000 resources allocated to the end-to-end supply chain, refocus them on the human in the loop component, and be able to operate that chain with around 500 employees. And that was within a 12 period. Now, what we did, we worked with the client on kind of change management. We were able to identify other tasks where we could provide more service. And so those other supply chain resources were able to move into other open roles and be able to provide more support services and higher value services to the customer. Significant savings in terms of cost. We've then been able to bring in things because you're building now layer and you're orchestrating across many different components of the supply chain. You can bring in a lot of and demand prediction with kind of a agentic side, marry that up with like an inventory agent, and that allows you to be much predictive in terms of how you allocate and manage your inventory. So in that case, we layered in another technology called that allowed us to predict over 300 part categories, 80% high level accuracy, where we could utilize that as kind of the the gold standard for prediction. The remaining 20% we'd use our hardcore kind of data scientists. But because of that, we've been able to much better handle of inventory, reducing things around stock and excess, and freeing up around $10 million a year in savings. And then because you have this broader, again, orchestration layer, we were able to bring in things like AI simulation, where you can then do quick, impact assessment. In this case, this specific customer had a major earthquake at one of their supplier facilities. Typically take about 2 days to really understand ripple effect of how that affects not just like your suppliers and area in production, but like the ultimate end customer. Because fully connected semantic or ontology layer, we can do that within 2 hours. So that allows us to really de-risk, that type of environment. We're seeing, for organizations that have invested or starting to invest in an ontology or semantic layer, we're able to bring AI, collaboration with a client. Within 4 weeks, we brought the entire AI framework to a customer, targeting, roughly around $1 million a month in savings. So these are like major areas we can drive with agentic, and you see the market is so interested in this. And I think from an overall organization, like you look at the customer market, there's still somewhat immaturity around like full multi-agent orchestration. But when you get to the higher level and you find the mature clients, they're able to take advantage of that today. And this is why I get excited about agent orchestration, is because of the size of impact that we can deliver through this type of capability.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Nicholas. That was an excellent example of the type of impact that we're seeing. Linus, from your perspective, which industries are leading the adoption of orchestration, and what's driving that momentum?
I think the question should be turned around: which industries are not are not. So every industry is obviously interested in it, because agentic AI is not just for industry use cases, but it's also for all the back office use cases, right? Like customer care, finance, HR, and some form of supply chains as well. The industries, very specific use cases I like to call out, are in manufacturing, like discrete and process manufacturing, right, using agentic AI, as I mentioned, for orchestrating planning, procurement, production, and logistics, right, especially over, right, a multi-enterprise environment, right, in their ecosystem of supply chain. And that can drive all of the good benefits that we talked about, like in inventory turns, or even reliability scores in returns and repairs. In the retail and supply chain logistics as well, we're starting to see also multi-enterprise orchestration really become important, because that enables real-time cross-company workflow automations and exception management again. So one of the things that these industries have in general is that lots and lots of supply chain actors and stakeholders in there. We also see that in healthcare, life sciences, or even energy and utilities. In healthcare and life sciences, you can imagine that would be the last one, right, to do anything. But as we saw with the pandemic, they really flipped and turned around to operate in the digital domain. So now they're taking it further, right, by upgrading and further defining their patient journeys. And it could be digital patient journeys as well, or clinical operations, right? And once they define, right, some of these patient journeys, they're now able to determine where agentic AI can play a very big role in either compliance, process optimization, and orchestrating again various systems and applications together. In asset intensive industries, energy, utilities, resources, agentic AI is used for grid management, asset management, which includes predictive maintenance and even sustainability reporting. So those are some of those that I'd like to call out, Carlos.
Wow, it's really interesting to see how it's just happening so fast across the board, right? Okay, so now let's shift into something that all the organizations want to know about. How do we actually get started? Nicholas, what's the best way for organizations to begin their orchestration journey without causing too much disruption?
I think the first thing when we try and work with our customers, first thing is really understanding, building a strategy, I would say, building a strategy towards a semantic layer and ontology is a good starting point. The second thing is really focus on the highest impact workflow or use cases part of the business. And the reason we want to do that is because you can investments into the wider kind of orchestration capabilities. So you can start small. You can start flow or single set of workflows. You can semantic layer. You can build out that on the back of like business cases that you have. And I think making sure that in that process, and ultimately that's going to drive kind of investment that you're going to need for kind of that broader transformation journey that you're going to go on when it comes to full orchestration. I think the second thing is really ensure that you have transparency and audit trails. So explainable AI, super important. So it speaks this language people can understand within the organization why the agents had made a decision or why they weren't able to make a decision. And you have that auditability. I think governance is super important. So it's not just about having an agent that works in your environment, but what happens when maybe you have within your supply chain, maybe you have new suppliers, you have new products. Like you want to be able to make sure that the agents are making good decisions over time. So like things where that governance agent can manage like time series data, looking at accuracy, like specificity, looking at whether or not the outcome is good or not. I think using AI to judging things around like reinforcement training back into the agent so they learn from didn't do well. I think having human feedback that is used as reinforcement learning as well. So you want to again have that kind of circular loop, but for sure, transparency, traceability, explainability, being able to audit visibility to the team. You got to start with us, and that's really what we see as the main spaces.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, those are some really practical points. All right. So now let's jump to the fun section that we're going to do today. So before we wrap things up, I'd like to just do a little fun, rapid, true or false round with both of you to help bust some of the AI orchestration myths. So I'll read a statement, and each of you just come out and say true or false. And then if you'd like to just add one sentence to complete your thoughts, that'll be okay too. All right, so here we go. True or false? Agentic AI replaces humans.
False.
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 Okay. True or false? Orchestrations slow innovation.
False.
False.
Nicholas? All right. And one more. True or false? Manufacturing doesn't need orchestration.
False. You got it. You got that.
All right, so all false. That's great. All right. So now let's just wrap this up. We're at the end of our segment here. So in order to wrap this up, I'm just going to quickly give you 3 AI orchestration blueprint points to get you started. So first, start with adaptive workflows, not isolated automation. 2, embed governance and security from day one. And 3, align orchestration with KPIs like OEE, OTIF, and defect rates. And I don't know if you'd like to just add one more piece of advice for organizations who are trying to start their orchestration journey today. Maybe we'll start with Linus first, and then Nicholas. Linus?
Yeah, sure. I'd just like to add one last prediction. We think that by the end of this year, a quarter of all Asian 2000 job roles will involve working with AI agents, no matter where you are, redefining that long-held traditional entry, mid, and senior level positions.
Thank you, Linus. And Nicholas?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a lag, but I would just say that agentic AI will augment humans by working in coordination. Really, I think humans at the end, judgment and the accountability and the empathy and the creative thought. And so I think seeing digital coworkers and understanding how to leverage them as part of your day-to-day function, and people more successful rather than kind of fearing and running away from them. I think figuring out how best to leverage that to be more effective.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nicholas. All right, so fantastic. Thank you both. And thank you to everyone who's joining us today. If you'd like to dive deeper into this topic, simply scan the QR code that's about to jump on the screen now, or the link which will drop below in the comments. There you'll find demos, insight papers, and ways to connect with our team. You can also subscribe to our series and get notified for upcoming episodes. And great news, even though our broadcast is about to end, we'll still be right here for the next 20 minutes to answer all of your questions live. So please drop your questions in the comments section below, and we're ready to answer them for you. And if you found this session valuable, please share it in your network. And let's keep this conversation going. Now, one final thought. If AI orchestration is about coordination and trust, what happens when sovereignty enters the picture? Join us in episode 4, AI Sovereignty, Balancing Innovation and Control. And we'll discuss it there. All right, everybody. Thank you very much, and we'll see you there. Take care.
Hey.